Generation no one talks about before smartphones, before helicopter parents, before the internet answered every question. There was a generation that learned to grow up alone. You pull a small key from the thin chain hanging around your neck. You slide it into the lock. The door opens. Inside, it's quiet. There's something strange about the way we talk about generations. Entire debates erupt around the values of baby boomers. Endless articles dissect the ambitions, anxieties, and lifestyles of millennials. And lately, the world seems almost fascinated by Generation Z, studying their habits, their humor, their relationship with technology, as if observing a brand new cultural phenomenon. But quietly sitting in the middle of all these conversations is a generation that rarely gets mentioned at all. Not controversial enough to spark arguments. Not young enough to dominate headlines. Just there. That generation is Generation X. Born roughly between 1965 and 1980, they grew up in a strange historical space, wedged between two worlds that looked nothing alike. If you look around, you'll notice them. They're often the coworker who gets things done without announcing it. The parent who doesn't overshare online. The person who helped build the digital world, yet somehow feels completely comfortable living without constant attention. They rarely complain. They rarely broadcast their struggles. And they almost never try to explain themselves. Which might be why so many people misunderstand them. Because beneath that quiet exterior lies a psychology shaped by something very different from the generations before or after them. To understand Generation X, you have the kids who let themselves into you and Generation X. You must imagine a very ordinary afternoon in 1978. The school bell has just rung. Sidewalks fill with children walking or riding their bikes home. Backpacks bounce against their shoulders. Sneakers scrape softly along the pavement. Laughter fades as one by one. Every child turns down a different street. Eventually, you reach your house. You pull a small key from the thin chain hanging around your neck and slide it into the lock. The door opens. Inside, it's quiet. No voices. No parents asking how your day went. No one checking whether you made it home safely. Just the soft echo of your own footsteps moving through an empty house. And back then, there were no smartphones. No security cameras. No quick message to say, "I'm home." For a moment, the silence feels bigger than the rooms themselves. So what do? You drop your backpack on the floor. You wander into the kitchen. You open the refrigerator and search for something. Maybe a slice of bread, maybe peanut butter, maybe leftovers from last night. Then you sit at the kitchen table. So, Gen X developed a mindset psychologists sometimes called defensive realism. They still hoped things would work out. But deep down, they always prepared for the possibility that they might not. Not because they were negative, because they had seen enough to understand that stability could vanish without warning. And that belief would shape the way they approached almost everything in adulthood. Their careers, their money, their relationships, and even the way they trusted authority. Because when you grow up watching the rules change in real time, you learn something important. Don't depend on the system. Depend on yourself. And that mindset would become one of the defining traits of Generation X. But it also led to another surprising habit. One that still separates them from younger generations today. Gen X didn't just learn independence. They learned something else. Something that would shape the way they used technology and the way they presented themselves to the world. And that lesson would shape the way they interact with technology and the way they choose to show themselves to the world. The generation that learned to stay private today, sharing your life online, feels almost automatic. People post what they're eating, where they're traveling, what they're thinking. Entire lives unfold in real time across social media. But for many people in Generation X, that instinct still feels strange. Not because they don't understand technology. In fact, many of them helped build the digital world we use today. But the way they grew up taught them something very different about visibility. Because when Gen X was young, mistakes were temporary. For kids growing up during those years, that tension created another psychological habit. A strange one. They learned to protect themselves with humor. Not loud humor. Not attention-seeking humor. But something subtler. A kind of irony that allowed them to keep the world at arm's length. Because sometimes the easiest way to handle uncertainty is to laugh at it before it has the chance to hurt you. And that instinct would become one of the most recognizable traits of Generation X. But their relationship with uncertainty didn't stop there. It also shaped like something else. Something that would define the way they approached work for the rest of their lives. Why Generation X learned to stay that quiet respect for privacy. It was something Generation X learned very early in life. Because once something is visible to the world, it can't easily be taken back. And that instinct to keep a certain distance from public attention shaped another surprising trait of Generation X. A kind of emotional armor. One built not from silence alone, but from humor. Humor as emotional armor. If you spend enough time around people from Generation X, you start to notice something about their humor. It's sharp, sometimes dry, often a little sarcastic. They have a habit of turning serious situations into jokes, not because nothing bothers them, but because humor became a kind of shield, a way to keep difficult things at a safe distance. You laugh first, before the moment has a chance to sting. While many of them were learning responsibility early, they were also watching something unsettling unfold in the adult world around them. They saw their park and then lose those jobs almost overnight. Factories closed. Corporations restructured. Entire departments disappeared. People who had done everything they were supposed to do suddenly found themselves starting over. For Gen X, that was a powerful lesson. It taught them something most workplace manuals never mention. Loyalty to a company doesn't guarantee security. So instead of trusting the system, Gen X placed their trust somewhere else. In their own skills, in their own competence. You learn not to wait for someone else to step in. Over time, that independence becomes second nature. But beneath that independence lies an interesting contradiction. Because while Gen X rarely asks for help, they won't make social media, and they certainly won't turn it into a public performance. But when someone they see quietly, without drama, without recognition. Part of this comes from the when parents were working long hours and friend people, you people who helped you figure things out those. But it also shapes how they think about authority. Unlike some generations that automatically, they respect competence. Sometimes it's boring, sometimes exhausting. But hiding inside those small routines was an important lesson. Work wasn't something you talked about. It was something you did. No audience, no applause. Just responsibility. And if you didn't show up, someone noticed. A porch without a newspaper. An empty shift at the store. A manager asked a simple question the next day. Where were you? That kind of accountability shapes a young mind in quiet ways. It teaches you that effort matters. That reliability matters. Careers that once seemed stable suddenly felt uncertain. Entire industries have transformed almost overnight. For many Gen Zers, the timing couldn't have been more unsettling. The younger ones graduated from college right as the dot-com bubble burst in the early 2000s. The older ones were finally hitting their professional stride when the 2008 global financial crisis swept through the economy. Businesses collapsed. Homes were lost. Careers that had taken years to build were suddenly wiped away. For a generation that had already grown up watching their parents face layoffs and corporate restructuring, these moments felt like confirmation of something they had suspected all along. The system wasn't permanent. Stability could disappear faster than anyone expected. And because of that, many Gen X adults adopted a practical survival strategy. They diversified, not always because they dreamed of becoming entrepreneurs. Coins in a jar on the kitchen counter. When the money was gone, it was gone. There was no invisible credit line quietly extending the moment. So spending time required a small moment of thought. A pause. Do I really need this? And over time, that habit built something powerful, financial awareness. But their caution with money wasn't just about budgeting. It was also shaped by something they witnessed growing up. They had seen what happened when security suddenly disappeared. During the late 20th century, economic shifts forced many families to start over. Factories closed. Generation X quietly learned how to stand on their own long before the world expected them to. They grew up during the fading tension of the Cold War. They watched technology slowly transform daily life, from rotary phones and cassette tapes to the early days of the internet. They saw industries collapse and entirely new ones appear. In many ways, they became a bridge between two completely different eras. one foot in an analog world, the other stepping into the digital age. They learned how to adapt, how to adjust when the rules change, how to keep moving forward even when the path ahead wasn't perfectly clear. And that ability to adapt without making a lot of noise became one of their greatest strengths. You won't always hear them talking about resilience. They won't always post about personal growth or self-improvement, but their lives often reflect it. Quietly, steadily, from childhood, they learned not to wait for someone else to step in. If something went wrong, they handled it. If a problem appeared, they tried to solve it themselves. And while that independence made them incredibly capable adults, it also created a quieter challenge. Because when you become used to solving everything alone, asking for help can start to feel uncomfortable, sometimes even like failure. Studies on adult behavior have shown that many Gen Zers are less likely to seek social support during stressful periods, not because they don't have people who care about them, but because reaching out doesn't come naturally. Instead, they carry the weight themselves. They work through the problem. They push forward. And often, the people around them may never even realize how much pressure they're handling internally. But this same self-reliance shaped something else about the way Generation X interacts with the world. It influenced how they learned. Because before the internet made information instantly available, knowledge required effort. Real effort. And that experience created a very different relationship with learning than what many people experience today. When life became uncertain, they kept going anyway. No dramatic speeches. No need for validation. Just a quiet understanding that life doesn't pause while you complain about it. You simply adjust and continue. And maybe that's why many people from Generation X rarely feel the need to explain themselves to the world. They don't need constant reassurance. They don't need every decision to be understood by everyone around them. Because their confidence was built long before social media ever existed. It was built through experience, through responsibility, through countless small moments when they had no choice but to figure things out on their own. That kind of confidence is different. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention, artificial intelligence. And Gen X became the generation standing right in the middle of that transformation. They remember life before everything was connected, and they helped build the systems that eventually connected everyone. They watched the old world fade away and helped construct the new one. But bridges rarely get attention. People notice the cities on each side. They celebrate their destinations. But the bridge itself? It simply does its job, quietly holding everything together. That's a lot like Generation X. They don't demand recognition. They rarely try to dominate the conversation. They simply adapt. They build. They solve problems. And they keep moving forward. They gave their children something they didn't always have growing up. More attention, more safety, more opportunity. But sometimes they also wonder if that protection made the next generation a little less prepared for uncertainty. Because Gen X understands something deeply. Life can change quickly,